Look, I'm going to ask you about transgression. Is it fun or transgression that made you write this opera?
Oh, I don't even understand the question.
That's a hard one.
Well, the Importance of Being Earnest is an extraordinary thing. There was nothing like it before it, and nothing like it since. It was one of those moments where all the forces in Wilde came together. It's rather like Debussy's Pelléas. It's something that's unrepeatable.
But it's the apotheosis of his kind of work, in a way.
Well, yes, it's like extreme nonsense. It's a kind of I don't know. It's like as if Wilde was in an ecstasy of delight.
He himself described it as a delicate bubble of fancy. Right. It teaches us to take the trivial things in life seriously, and the serious things in life with a sincere and studied triviality. And it's right. It's a masterpiece. It's extraordinary to think that in the 19th century more theatres were built in London than had been built anywhere else in the world up until that time, and in that whole area in which theatre must have been so important, there is only one masterpiece.
Yeah.
And that's the importance of being earnest.
Yeah.
Everything else is melodrama and nonsense. Yeah, Mrs. Lynn, ridiculous things, Maria and the Red Barn, and eventually, of course, comes Ibsen and Chekhov and Shaw and remake the theatre. But up until that time,
it's actually now that you say that, there's something terribly mysterious about it. I mean, it's obviously clearly incredibly funny, but also has all these dark, surreal qualities. But there's something. The mysteriousness of it is why it is the only one of its kind, and it's the only masterpiece from that period.
I think it's also the one where the plot is the most. In previous ones, they're drawing room comedies which rely on scandals and stories in the background that are rather melodramatic. His is folkloric. It's almost a Babes in the Wood story of two lost twins. It's a wonderfully old-fashioned idea of a story, and it's just seen through language. Of a kind that had never been written before.
Yes, did you want to turn language, I mean these strange aphorisms and to lose one parent, to turn the language that is kind of Irish or Anglo-Irish into music? Were you trying to transfer?
No.
You weren't?
No.
Because, I mean, I'm just thinking because you're
impossible,
using things
And in fact, I cut 2/3 of the text. Isn't that really cruel, really brutal? And in fact, if you had never read the play, I guarantee you would not know that 2/3 of it is missing.
No.
Because the structure of it is so, the bones of it are so strong. It's like the X-ray is so sturdy that 2/3 gone. I've just so you have the essence of it.
But what were you both doing with that particular opera that you hadn't done with, say, Petra von Cantor, that you hadn't done with your work on it? Were you both? You were delighted by the fact that there was plate crashing and there were so many things to conduct that were not quite the same thing.
It was so perfect because anyone who heard Gerald play the piano has a special kind of intensity and mania that only in a way you can bring. So the work obviously opens with the recording of Gerald, in this case, Gerald playing one of his own piano pieces off stage.
It's an arrangement of Auld Lang Syne.
Oh yes, Auld Lang Syne.
Because the first line of the play is, "Did you hear what I was playing?"
Yes.
I didn't think it polite to listen, sir. I'm sorry for that, for your sake.
Yes.
I don't play the piano accurately. Anybody can play the piano accurately, but I play with a wonderful expression.
Yes.
So far as the piano is concerned, sentiment is my forte.
So he comes on and says that after you've had this terrific, crashing, wonderful sort of welter of sound. So that fits very well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, it's a symmetrical story. It's a beautifully symmetrical story, and that helps, as you say, the structure, the skeleton. I mean, you have two pairs of lovers, and they meet in either act, and they fall instantly in love, and the women are strong. The women are the ones who basically give commands.
Yeah.
The men are really. Are really pretty weak. I mean, apart from their language and the money, they are nothing. They're ciphers.
I think of the women, Gwendolen and Cecily, as this scene, this great vicious duel between them in the second act, where I thought, it's so witty but so vicious, and I tried to think of something that people do when they're really angry, and I thought of breaking something. So in this scene, Gwendolen mandolin smashes 40 dinner plates during the scene in a ritualistic, formal way to a specific tempo, and then towards the end of the scene they shoot one another several times. But of course, it doesn't have any effect on them at all, because I think of them as the undead, in a way.
But did it sustain your interest in the moment you started? Because you were a long time composing it, weren't you?
No, I wasn't. It was an incredibly short time. In fact, I wasn't, when Tom and the LA Phil suggested I do something, I suggested two possibilities, an opera by Beethoven and Wilde. And Wilde was the one that came to the fore. And so I had to do it very quickly, 8 or 9 months.
So the second time that he plays the piano, is that later in Act 3? Is it the whole orchestra? What is that section? The whole orchestra plays a bit of Beethoven's Ninth in clusters.
What's he
doing on
stage?
Yes,
there's an Ode to Joy moment, isn't there?
Right.
Well, yes. We see both Lady Bracknell in My Ernest. Both Lady Bracknell and Miss Prism are composers, and they sing their own settings in the opera of Freude schöne Götter Funken, and
quite a long time.
Yes, they love Germany. Germany is their default mode, and sometimes Lady Bracknell, she whips herself up into a frenzy and can't not speak in German. So there's one scene in the third act where she's talking to Cecily and says, there are two things absent from our age, principle and profile, and you have to have your chin higher, dear, and that the style depends absolutely on how the chin is worn, and just right now it's worn very high. And so I can do that. And so she says then, die zwei schwachen Punkte unseres Zeitalters sind sein Mangel an Prinzipien und sein Mangel an Profil. Das Kinn etwas höher, Kindchen, still beruht weitgehend auf der Art und Weise, wie das Kinn getragen wird. Zur Zeit für das sehr hohe Gedanken.
Fantastic. There is something about, I mean, she's described Lady Bracknell, but before you even see her, she's a monster without being a myth, which is really rather unfair, as it's described. And indeed, the very first thing we ever hear of her is the bell ringing, and it says that must be Aunt Augusta. No one else rings in that Wagnerian manner.
Yes.
And she talks about Algernon rooms go in and talk about the music, which leaves Jack and Gwendolyn alone for the famous proposition scene. And she go, and as she's going out, she says, German music I can thoroughly approve of. And so there is, I think, a very good, as it were, textual justification for making it German. You may like to know I'm one of the very few people on the planet who had the extraordinary experience of seeing Jonathan Miller's Importance of Being Earnest, starring Irene Handel, who may not mean much to you.
No, I've heard of it. Yeah.
Irene Handel was she usually played Char Ladies, most famous as Benny Hill's sister in The Italian Job. We like some big, and she actually was Irene Handel. She was from Austria, and for 2 weeks in preview in Brighton, Jonathan and she agreed that Lady Bracknell should be Austrian. And there was this to be born at any rate bred in a handbag seems to me to show a contempt for the ordinary decencies of everyday life that led us to the French Revolution, and I assume you know what that unfortunate movement led to. It was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen, but it was magnificent. Yeah. I think many people watching will say, if there's anything you can remark about The Importance of Being Earnest, it is that it is perfect. It is a flawless piece of work. Yeah. It is simply flawless. Its structure, its character, the language, the consistency of the language, the absolute lack of sentimentality. Even in Ideal Husband, even in Lady Windermere's Fan, there is melodrama, there are ridiculous letters, there are threats of suicide, there's political scandal. It's all a bit overwrought. This is just, as he says, a delicate bubble of fancy. And you touch a bubble and it goes. And yet what you've shown is that actually you can take a machete to a souffle and have fantastic results, because there's something in the culture about the importance.
It's become to signify something.
It has.
Both transgression and also hidden reality. So the audience are flattered when they watch it that they're both watching the surface story and this understanding that they're also watching something that is hiding transgression. So people are looking for transgressions all the time. I don't know if musically you were excited by that.
When you say transgression, I mean,
I suppose I mean that the hidden, that the language that is is delicately being woven by any of the characters who seem to be speaking normal English, but in fact they're speaking in English that is absolutely coded and also witty on the surface, but actually hiding a sort of upset, I would say. I mean, oddly an upset without taking the humour from it. There's violence in it.
Well, you see, I think of the people in it as almost like a menagerie, really. They're like animals who are delightful, but who suddenly can do you damage and be very vicious. So it's...
Don't speak slightingly of society. Only people who can't get into it do that. You know, it is full of. I mean, it's full of cattiness. And there's long been a view that Lady Bracknell is a parvenu, is an arriviste.
Yes.
That she married Lord Bracknell for his money, and therefore she's far more self-conscious of what society is than a true aristocrat would be. If you were to take someone in the 1890s, like a Duchess of Devonshire or a Duchess of Bute or whoever that may be, they would never talk about society.
They never ask you what side of the street you live on.
And they certainly would, they wouldn't use the word society. To them, it is just it's a given.
Yes.
It wouldn't be worth discussing. Right. Whereas she is a rapacious. You almost see her steel claws come out like Wolverine. You know, there is something in her that is absolutely rapacious.
And anti-intellectualism, isn't there?
Totally.
Do you know everything or nothing? I know nothing.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I do not approve of anything which tempers with natural ignorance. Is a reply.
I'm afraid the same thing might be said today. I mean, there is a...
Also, of course, in an opera, the nice thing is they don't just stick to the lines. They can break into not only sort of maniacal lines of song, but they can even be wordless. There's one huge bit where they all sing together this kind of yowling chorus.
Yes.
I'm not quite sure. It seems almost like a sort of primeval orgy.
It happens in the third act when Chasuble comes and says, "So do I take it there will be no christenings at all this afternoon then?" And the whole ensemble do this glissando, serious glissandi, and I was actually quite pleased with that because I suddenly thought I am it's sort of very arrogant of me to say so, but I'm now actually reaching Wilde on his own territory. Somehow the voiceless glissandi, the wordless glissandi, seem to convey more the rapaciousness of what was in the text than actual setting the text, you know.
Yes.
And actually, when I was frightened of it when I began, so I thought I would have a chorus rather like the Bach Passions, and so the chorus appears briefly in the act one, saying things like a man who marries without knowing Bunbury has a very tedious time of it, but then I became more confident and dropped the chorus, and so that's why it only appears for about 30 seconds. So it appears as a pre-recorded thing, like a Deus Ex Machina.
So you bring out the wildness.
The idea is grotesque and irreligious, is the way she puts it.
Exactly.
As Stephen quotes it, you can see it the moment that somebody speaks it. And just having seen the concert version of the opera, it's so clear in your mind, isn't it, what it is visually, that you've given it to us, but it gives itself to you. You don't need a production of it to see it. It happens the moment that people start to speak, don't they? As they function.
That concert performance in LA actually was fantastically theatrical. I mean,
it was marvellous, it was very exciting to watch. And of course, like in a good Shakespeare, you felt that the play of it was happening in the mind or the ear of the listener. But you had already made it happen because you'd made these huge decisions about it.
Yeah.
And I gather some of it's a 12-tone, is that right?
Well, you see, this was a very funny thing.
I love that we say that carefully. What you said with some disapproval?
I'm excited. I mean, I'm thrilled.
You sounded like Lady Bracknell.
You did. 12-tone.
Yes, 12-tone we cannot possibly allow. Gorelsky, I believe, is thoroughly respectable.
No, you see, what happened was, when I began writing very original music. I kind of, mined myself to find this original music, and it sounded fake. And there was something about pastiche 12-tone that seemed more original than my original music. And so I use that when Jack and Algernon have their thing about love.
Peculiarly devoted to bread and butter.
Exactly, all that stuff. Yes. So that's all 12-tone pastiche. But of course, it's a kind of a fine line because it's a kind of pastiche that obviously has to wear well as well. Yeah. And then it goes into all kinds of other music. And there's something about the play, I suppose, that embraces everything. And so there are all kinds of music in it. You know.
Yes. So, I think you're right about it being almost sort of an icon of construction now for the 20th century. That
so it contains everything.
It contains everything. Though the complaint about it at the time was that it didn't have any moral.
Yes,
I think it does.
Yes. Indeed, it's there in the title. I've only realised. Yes. I've last realised The vital importance of being
earnest. And also maybe that sort of play had to finish, something new had to occur. I mean, he did bring the society to its own moment and his own destruction. And you told me that you had been very moved reading the transcript of the court case. Was that before? Yes, the trial. Was that before or afterwards?
Let's not forget.
The
yes.
three trials, yes. But
and why was I moved?
Well, you said that. I mean, you told me this in the telephone actually some months ago, and I was very interested that you two had maybe both been entertained by the play,
I think maybe
and then also the sorrow that is.
Yeah, I think maybe I was moved and horrified because the awful thing about the trials was that Wilde became terribly unfunny and desperate.
Yes.
And
how could he?
Yes, and so he was reduced, and the whole thing he invited it all on himself. It need never have happened. He brought it all on himself. It was all his own fault, and so his repartee with the barristers and everything, it became less and less and less funny and more embarrassing and more desperate. He was like a hounded thing at the end.
But there was a sort of, at that moment when the Marquis of Queensberry was going to bring him a basket of rotten vegetables. So it was, the moment of its happening in theatrical terms was also a kind of break in his life, wasn't it?
It was the absolute high point of his life.
And also the lowest.
Literally the peak, because the moment he reached it, he went straight down again. Was the first night of The Importance of Being Earnest, which was the greatest first night in 19th century theatrical history, at which Queensberry bought the rotten vegetables.
But he didn't get in, is that right?
He didn't get in, so he went to the club and left a card to Oscar Wilde posing as a Sodomite, misspelt, and Wilde chose to take that as a libel. If he just ripped it up and put it in his pocket, he would have been alive in the Second World War. I mean, it's a bizarre thought. It's just too sad, and it informs the play, no matter how light and fluffy a version you get of it. It does inform the play. I think you can't go to it without that knowledge.
I just feel that informs your making this opera of this play, which is now much greater than the sum of its parts of a play.
I was wondering, I mean, as I was saying, I don't think it would ever have been possible for him to match Ernest again. And of course, and you wondered, being in prison, did that crush him, or was he on waning anyway, creatively? I mean, it's hard to know. I mean,
it's the highest point. I mean, he got better and better and better. He truly found his voice with The Importance of Being Earnest. It's the one.
He could turn every phrase and change.
I feel it was that moment that no matter what happened to him, that it was the. I don't think he could have repeated it.
Tell us something more about wit in music.
I was just thinking while I was talking how, however it is to watch when we do this opera. At the end that I feel like I've been in the ring for sort of 10 rounds by the end of it. I feel like I'm covered in scratches and it's so physically demanding, and I'm not even making any noise. Yes, completely. The whole thing is just it's wonderfully relentless. There's one thing, sort of tidal wave of sort of furious noise comes at you, and then there's another one, and then another, and it's very beautiful as well.
And there's humour in it
but
too.
It's terribly funny.
It's quite small, actually.
It makes a lot of noise for a small orchestra.
24.
24, and a number of percussionists hitting. It's quite a lot of kitchen, but it's a huge. I mean, when they start on the Beethoven all in clusters. It's a terrific sort of. And you take Beethoven
when Jack goes upstairs to look for the handbag, and then there's you can hear you hear Beethoven slow moving the symphony. The slow movement of the ninth.
We have to do it at Beethoven's tempo as well, which is so you get this great and the trumpets. It's just incredibly fast, which is sort of. I think what I'm just trying to get through it. But somebody who was at the rehearsals, listening to rehearsals, he could see us all getting red in the face, sort of trying to do this. He said, one of the other players who wasn't in it, he said, I can see that this is kind of really agony for you guys on stage, but it's a lot of fun for us.
I've seen you in the podium, and you're not averse to sweating when things are tough. So you must have been drenched at the end. And you're looking slimmer and better than I've seen you for a long time.
But there are a lot of new things in it, aren't there? Because part of the reason I remember seeing it, and you were all exhausted from the rehearsal you'd had in the afternoon, and it was going to happen that evening. Because of course it doesn't exactly slot in. It keeps on changing. tempo and also just changing its style almost.
Yes, it does
me.
on a sixpence.
In fact,
you don't really do transitions, I think.
So this was a concert performance. You've never actually had a stage performance. Are you planning a stage performance here?
Well, it would be wonderful. Nothing definite. Nothing
still
planned.
for the moment it would be.
It feels good actually, because you're not aware that there are no sofas and trays of cucumbers. It doesn't really add anything, and also because it is completely hyper. It would be funny, but it'd be it's so hyper realistic when they start shooting each other. Are we actually going to have guns? No.
Yeah, you hear all the guns. And the thing is, you see, and often
the fire marshal.
And you know how often the actual stagings can be disappointing. Depending on the kind of production it is, and the audience their imagination you can go wherever you want.
Distances everything, doesn't it? It can very much distance things.
Yeah. It nails it down, whereas this somehow explodes.
You bring out a joke. You know when that bit where she's throwing the plates in between every syllable, and there's a moment when she says something about even though you are 32.
Yeah,
40.
40. Oh yes, there was only the plates are broken
absolutely
completely rhythmically. Dum, dum.
Between each syllable.
I have like you like that, and the plates but when she comes and when you are 40, then there's one crotchet extra.
Yeah, so it's
2.
40. Two.
The rhythmics.
I know.
But it actually produces tension in us, of course, the audience, which is the right thing too. Which is, I think, goes back to Arthur about transgression. I do feel that you're being kept on your mettle. You're not being soothed by the humour.
I have learned to use paper plates for the rehearsals because they got through so much quicker.
Imagine it was like you used the kind of the bouncy Greek kind.
The ending where Jack finally says, "On the contrary, Aunt Augusta, I finally realized the vital importance of being earnest." Then there's this chord, and it's a very tricky ending to bring off. Actually, even people in the theatre say it's a very kind of difficult kind of.
It was rewritten several times by George Alexander, the actor manager, by Wilde himself. Yes, there are different endings.
Oh, right, because they recognise that it was a tricky.
Yes,
it's a very strange. So what I did was I have a chord, but it's but I in LA it was just an enigmatic chord. But now for London, I introduced 8 new dinner plates to be broken at the end. To somehow,
really,
yeah, because I feel the ending is a little too enigmatic.
Well, that's the first time.
Any sort of Nan Caro or John Cage.
It's the only sentimental line, actually, is this importance of being earnest, that you were talking about, and non-sentimentality. It's the only line that can sound, I can now understand the importance of being earnest. But apart from the obvious sexual themes that are frightening in it, for anybody who is trying not to see them, there's also this thing of illegitimacy. I think that's a really big part of 19th century and indeed 20th century drama.
Absolutely. Where's that baby? I'm unmarried. Miss Prism is absolutely horrified by the idea that it's her baby. Because
she must bring down this basket. And I think that so much about the revelation, actually, it's revelation, isn't it, of identity.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's not just sexual identity, it's actual real identity in society.
Yeah.
It's very good territory for opera. I mean, both from the point of view of that beautiful geometry of the plot, that makes it work, and also, I mean, there's a real sense when there's a proper chorus at the end. They all stand around and they're all suddenly,
it's almost like a
happy ever after.
Yes, and a comedy of errors, lost twins reunited and so on.
Exactly.
It's a great deal of that. It's
throw in a tune.
But of course, the thing of a concert performance, let's not forget, I'm sure most of us, all of us probably, first encountered opera on record. And some part of us was often disappointed when we went to the opera house.
Exactly.
Partly because, especially if it was a long opera, in my case, Wagner, the singers save their voices, whereas in studios, they give every bar full value, because, as the old cliche of radio has it, the scenery is better.
Well, that's
it's actually it would be peculiarly distancing and alienating to pop it in a box set with pop punks and sofas and trellises, wouldn't it?
Yes, there's always a part of one saying, I thought she'd be taller, I thought she'd be blonde or whatever.
Did you surprise yourself writing this? Were you surprised by it?
Very, actually. I mean, I wanted to do it, and then people were saying it's a crazy idea. What can you possibly bring to the Wilde? And I thought, no, you don't understand. And after 2 years, I suddenly realized, yes, they're right, and I'm wrong. What can I possibly bring to it? And this is utterly, presumptuous. And then when the opportunity offered itself, I thought, no, I have to solve this. And then because I was forced to, I did. And so, anyway.
In your version, which is very funny, is you do get the feeling that marriage is a really terrifying thing that's going to happen. That you do get that both Algie and Jack do worry about the fact of marriage and marrying Gwendolen or Cecily? Or do you think it's just in the play, or do you think that's part of the...
There is there's a thing where the tune "Old Lang Syne" is used a lot. And the tune "Old Lang Syne" is used as the basis for the love duets in the first act between Gwendolen and Jack, is it? And in the second act between the other two.
Yes.
Exactly. And so it's as if they were almost cardboard cutout things that the same tune is used for both the same music is used for both passionate outpourings of the two acts, as if passionate outpourings are beside the point, really, and are as surreal as anything else.
Formality.
Yeah, formality. It's a sort of, it's as if it was a ritualized
they're not
thing.
Almost real emotions.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a sort of, I mean, that's one of the things that I'm sure it's true, but the sheer sense with the words that, you know, the audience would have laughed themselves silly, I'm sure, at the first night, but then that it never really touches the ground, that you're sort of skating on thin ice. So they must have somewhere in their subconscious thought, is this okay? I mean... There's a feeling you're getting away with something, but you don't quite know what it is.
Yes, I remember now, actually, you remind me now that I actually invested as much energy, deliberately, consciously, in the talk of food as in the talk of sex. They're both given equal whatever. And in fact, because I only use a third of the play, I keep every reference to food, so food looms even larger. Yeah. So all talk of tea cake and muffins and cucumbers, they loom incredibly, bread and butter especially, yeah. And so for the men, eating is absolutely as important as the women.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Very good.
That's
a life of...
And you've spoken about it in ways that anybody watching might think, my goodness, we've got serial music, we've got broken plates, we've got weird references and quotations from other composers, from Auld Lang Syne, from Beethoven. But I ought to say, not having been there, but having read about it, that it was a triumph. The audience absolutely loved it.
Yes.
That they screamed their delight. So you've created something that is a magical evening in the theatre, a musical evening, an operatic evening, however you would describe it. So, I mean, that's the point. We could easily be talking about something that was a highbrow and not for the masses and only for those who go to the odd London Sinfonietta performance and you know, good luck to them. But this is clearly something that could be a very popular entertainment amongst many people who not only don't go to opera, they certainly don't go to modern contemporary music. Yes. You've created somehow out of this what sounds like a mess, the way you've described it. You're being very modest. You've created something that is perhaps going to stay part of the repertoire for all time.
Yeah.
I hope so.
And that's a heck of a thing, isn't it?
Yes.
Watch it.
When you read it as a score, presumably, where was your mind going?
I was just thinking, okay, I've got to make this.
But you've worked with Joe.
We've collaborated
many times. Yeah. So you trusted him.
Oh yeah, I knew. Well, I knew it was. I knew it was going to make my eyebrows hit the sort of roof.
But maybe you have. Maybe you led the way for contemporary composers to realise that actually, you know, the modern, the contemporary music, whatever one wants to call it, contemporary classical music, whatever one wants to call it, can give joyous entertainment, even in a language that many people are not familiar with, like 12-tone prose and things like that. And that's thrilling.
It is.
That's thrilling, isn't it?
We should stop. We should stop. That's all of us. We should stop. Thank you very much.